Hey everyone, I'm the Real Ebab, and this is part 3 of a series on how to play Guardian. We've covered gems and defensive mode so far, and now we are going to cover the third large theme of Guardian, and that is Stasis. So first of all, Stasis holds cards for you in basically orb slots. Functionally, they're exactly the same as orb slots, as well as slime slots for slime boss. They stay in there for cost plus 1 turns. So a 1 cost card will go in there for 2 turns, a 2 cost will go in there for 3 turns, and so on. And every turn, the timer ticks down, and whenever it gets to 0, it puts the card back into your hand and discounts its cost to 0. So, from what I know of the Slay the Spire community in general, people really like to focus on effects that happen immediately. Which makes sense because, the general STS community plays base game, and effects like Offering or Fission, or Silence Discard Package to an extent, with Reflex and Tactician, those kinds of builds are really powerful because you can do a lot of things immediately when you need it to. But, so when these players come to play Guardian, it's a little bit difficult for them to wrap their heads around how good exactly Stasis is. And I was kind of the same way when I started out Guardian. I personally did not ascribe wholly to prioritizing stuff that happened immediately, although I do understand the value of that. After all, the more stuff you can do in a turn, the safer you are, and the faster you can end fights. However, I do understand the importance of making sure that you're set up for future turns. And I think that very naturally led me into Guardian in general, both with defensive mode and with this. So my message here is don't sleep on this. It's free cards. Even though you have to wait, it's still free cards. It's pseudo energy and pseudo draw. You're getting a card. After you put the card into stasis, once it comes out, you're getting that card at a discounted value, which means you're getting basically extra energy. And you're not sacrificing a draw in order to get that card back, so it's also an extra draw in your hand. And on top of those things, it's also card manipulation. You get to choose, most of the time, what goes into stasis. So we'll discuss the benefits of these things in a bit. Although the main thing to remember is that basically extra energy and extra draw gives you a lot of power. And waiting for it is not a huge downside, at least for Guardian. There is a small edge case with how stasis works. If you have a full hand, when a card in stasis comes out, or is supposed to come out, it will reduce the timer to 0, but it will stay in stasis. And this goes for every card, including cards that have effects that say that they exhaust whenever their timer runs out. We'll get to those cards in a minute. The thing is, though, is that stasis cards, I believe, do they come out before or after the draw? Let me try to remember this. They come out after you draw your 5 cards, but I think they happen before other effects. I'm not 100% sure. I know that it's not too difficult to have this edge case happen if you have specific things like Runic Pyramid, for example, or if you just have a lot of passive draw. Sometimes Accelerate can happen. And speaking of Accelerate, any card that says Accelerate just decreases the turn timer of your rightmost card. Let me actually write that down so we don't forget it. So basically, the card that you put into stasis first is going to be towards the right, and the more of them you get, they will be put further to the left, just like orbs. So accelerate can make you wait less for cards that you're trying to get discounted. That means also more control, and maybe even more cards in stasis. Sometimes you can create this cycle of putting cards into stasis and then accelerating them out to get them for free, and then since that empty space is in stasis, you can put more cards in, and so you can get even more cards for free as a result. So how you use this effectively, basically you want to use it as much as possible. The more free cards you get, the more powerful you will be. So you want to keep taking cards that put cards into stasis or themselves into stasis. You want to be able to fill those stasis slots most of the time. There have been a few runs I've had where I don't fill up my stasis slots. That's just not how the run worked out. So as always, just take what's best for your situation. But understand that getting free cards, investing in having free cards on a future turn really pays off in a big way. So you want to fill your stasis slots as much as possible. In Act 1, I generally try to take 3 or 4 sources of stasis, and that includes curl up. So I take 2 or 3 extra sources and then have curl up as another. Some cards count as multiple, such as planning, which puts the 2 top cards of your deck into stasis, and future plans, which puts a card every turn into stasis. I count that as 2 as well, because usually you put 1-cost cards in, and in 2 turns they come out, so you're usually juggling having 2 cards in from that specifically. It is a form of scaling. Very natural. It is a natural form of scaling to Guardian's Kit. So whatever you have, and because it's scaling of your cards specifically, it augments however good your deck is. It's kind of like a multiplier, I guess. I don't know what kind of number multiplier you would put on stasis specifically to say how much better your deck is with stasis, but it is multiplying how good your deck already is. And even with the base deck, multiplying the effects of your base deck is still very relevant. And I even have a run that I want to recap with you after I'm done talking about all the cards. A big way of using stasis is a big portion of using stasis well is knowing enemy patterns. Whenever you put a card into stasis, you know that it's going to come out in however many turns. Most of the time it's going to be 1-cost cards because those are the most abundant in pretty much any kit. You put 1-cost card in, it's going to come out 2 turns from now. So you have to think about what the enemy's going to be doing in 2 turns. Sometimes you have to think about what they're doing in 1 turn, because you can put cards that were in stasis back into stasis, and they'll still be 0 cost, so they'll go in for 1 turn. You can save it for the next turn like that. So keeping that in mind, knowing what enemy patterns are, you can plan for what's about to happen. And as an extension of that, I forgot to write this down and then didn't have room. Knowing what you're going to be doing in 2 turns, or however many turns with the card that you want to put into stasis. For example, if you have some block cards in your hand that you can put into stasis, but you're entering defensive mode next turn, that would mean that you're getting block cards out on the 2nd turn of defensive when you have some block built up from blur, as well as the 10 bonus block from leaving defensive mode. So in some cases, you might not have enough block with just defensive mode and the blur, but in a lot of cases, you might end up overblocking. So it might be better to put an attack into stasis instead. A combination of knowing what you're doing and what the enemy's doing in however many turns is really important to using this correctly. It's in a very similar vein to defensive mode, where you need to know enemy patterns in order to use that well. So I guess in a way, Guardian just requires a lot of game knowledge. Maybe that's another aspect as to why Guardian is so difficult to pick up for most people, aside from the complication of gems and defensive mode, and I guess even stasis being unintuitive. But regardless, once you get to that level, it is a very powerful tool, stasis specifically. There's also stasis combos. I mentioned accelerate before. You can make stasis combos by putting cards into stasis and then accelerating them out. And they count as combos despite the weird way that you go about it. Like, what's the point of putting a card into some arbitrary stasis slot and then immediately getting them out? It's because it discounts it to 0. It's just it's an extension of the waiting mechanic. You're usually supposed to wait. You can circumvent that by getting it early with Accelerate. So sometimes you can create pretty small combos. It's not there's not anything specific that I would want to say about stasis combos, I don't think, in general. A lot of real stasis combos come from very rare situations. I have a video on the channel from before this series even started, where I got a Metamorphosis, the 2-cost rare colorless card that creates attacks that cost 0. So, and that gave me a Fierce Bash, which is the card that puts itself into stasis, and it's an attack and it does a lot of damage. So what I was able to do in that video was attack something, it goes into stasis for only 1 turn, then I have multiple forms of Accelerate in my hand to accelerate that card out, play it again, which puts itself back into stasis, and repeat a few times, and that does massive damage because a 0-cost Fierce Bash is doing like 20 and increasing every time you play it damage. So yeah, it ends up being a lot. I don't think there's very many actual combos like that, but just being able to draft cards to create that is a valid form of strategy here. I don't think not every deck that uses stasis also has Accelerate as a main part of it. You can have a deck without Accelerate and it works just fine, just waiting for the cards to come out and planning your turns well. But having Accelerate allows you to get those cards out when you want them or need them. And then just getting the extra value on top of stuff. I guess in terms of combos, it would be beneficial to do that if you have, say, a temp strength gem in your hand that you want to play. You play that, you Accelerate a card out from stasis that's an attack, and then because you accelerated it out, you're getting that attack with the bonus of the 2 strength from the gem. Similarly, you can do temporary dexterity with blocks, and I guess you can also do vulnerable with attacks as well. Especially because Vent Steam is only 2 turns upgraded to 3 of vulnerable, so you sometimes want to get that out and happening before it runs out. Or sometimes you can just put the vulnerable sometimes you can just put Vent Steam back into stasis and then replay it for consistency. It's also a valid strategy. So yeah, just knowing to look for that kind of thing where you have Accelerate available to you along with an abundance of stasis can actually create some stuff that will do stuff immediately rather than having to wait. Of course, having Accelerate means that you probably need more cards that put into stasis than usual. So I guess we'll move into our next part, stasis density. I mentioned before that I like to have 2 extra sources or 3 extra sources by the end of Act 1 of stasis. So that's stuff like suspension, planning, future plans, all that stuff that we'll get into in a bit. It's basically as important as keeping your the density of your other cards in your deck, or the other types of cards, in order to keep a deck balance. A balanced deck usually has a decent number of attacks, decent number of block cards, and enough scaling cards or setup cards that power you up without killing you. So having enough attacks is important for taking care of weaker enemies quickly, as well as consistently doing damage in longer fights. Block is, of course, to keep you safe, and scaling is to make sure that you can handle the stronger fights in the game. And balancing all of those is important. Stasis is no different, but only because it's no different in how you execute it, but the reason is different. It's because you want to use it as much as possible. But overusing it means you're taking a little bit too much cards that try to give you extra value and then can't. The cards that give you stasis, that put cards into stasis, are balanced around the idea that you're going to get a free card sooner or later. So if you're taking those cards and you're not able to use the stasis from them, you're losing out on a bit of that. Sometimes that's okay, that's just going to happen because you draw cards in random orders at random times. That's variance in card games for you. So it's not a huge deal if you're missing out sometimes, it's just unavoidable. Having the extra stasis, which is why I say 2 to 3 extra stasis along with curl up in your deck, is fine because you have it more consistently. It's also important to get them early on in your... It's also important to have enough to get them early on in your combat so that you can get the benefits from that much earlier. Especially if you have cards that benefit from being in stasis specifically. So I gave you that metric. At the end of Act 1, you want to have 2 or 3 extra most of the time, unless your deck is very good at doing other things. Or it just didn't work out that way, like I said. From there, you just want to keep adding them occasionally, like maybe 1 or 2 an act, because you're going to keep adding cards as you go. Having that total of 3 or 4 at the end of Act 1 will only... it's good because you draw 5 cards a turn, and that's a significant portion of your deck. The further you go, the less that is of your deck, because you will have somewhere between 20, 30, maybe even 35 cards by the end of the game. So yeah, making sure that you can consistently keep your orb slots, I guess they're orb slots, your stasis slots filled, and being able to fill them early is very, very important. Alright, so now that we've talked about all that, let's move on to the individual cards. I just have to clear that. There are a total of 29 stasis-related cards that I found. Some of them are indirectly, but we'll start with this. Let me get out my other notes on my phone real quick. Right. So I just put these in my deck in the order that they show up in the compendium. But I'll talk about these in the logical order. So we have a few different categories. We have cards that put other cards into stasis. We have cards that put themselves into stasis. We have accelerate, and we have the miscellaneous stuff. So let's start with the cards that put other cards into stasis. This is what I was just talking about when it came to stasis, stasis density or stasis support. At least most of it. Starting with our starting card, Curl Up. 1 cost, place a random card from your hand into stasis, brace 10. My opinion of this card has changed positively. Back when I started the series, and for a long time, I was under the impression that Twin Slam was the go-to upgrade. Twin Slam being the Twin Slam upgrade giving you a second gem as well as a little bit more damage, or a second socket, I thought was a good way of just being able to socket another gem into it very quickly. This was a strategy that I had learned from someone else, and it has merit. It is, I think it is very valid as a strategy. Basically everything I say in these is my own advice, ultimately, and probably influenced by my own playstyle. But this is what I have discovered since then, and very recently, in fact. I feel like I've been undervaluing the upgrade of this. Place a card in your hand into stasis, brace 12. It takes away the random aspect, which means you get to choose which card. And very often, I took for granted the fact that a random card goes into stasis. I figured, yeah, that's fine. It is what it is. But the more I used an upgraded curl up, I usually ended up upgrading it later into the game for the extra control, because despite having extra energy, I have some more expensive cards, and it becomes more important to have a specific card into stasis the later the game goes. But since then, I think that I've learned that this has a much higher value than I thought. Choosing which card goes into stasis is really important because of that game knowledge I talked about. Knowing what your enemies are going to do in however many turns, and what you're going to do in however many turns. Putting a random card into stasis gives you value, but I'm finding it's very often, what's the word I'm looking for? Very mediocre value. Like, sure, you have a card that you can play for free, but often that card was just not necessary. There was another way that you could have played the turn. There were much better cards in hand that you wanted to hit. Or another big one, you sometimes want to play cards in a specific order, like entering defensive and then playing like a strike for strike, so you get the thorns damage from defensive mode. So you want to do like gear up, curl up to enter defensive, and then play strike for strike. But because curl up, the normal curl up is not chosen, it's random, it could hit that strike for strike. So then you have to do all this work to maximize your chances of not hitting that. And then sometimes you just hit it anyways. Another one is, in the early game especially, drawing curl up on turn 1 when you don't need the brace, or on a turn you don't need the brace at all. Playing it, and then it hits gear, and then it has a chance of hitting gear up. And when it hits gear up, you don't have that card for next turn to enter defensive on demand. Which is kind of why you wanted to play curl up in the first place. You'll have gear up because it retains, but you won't have curl up. But it causes that same problem again by not having the gear up in hand. So, yeah. In addition to not having the card that you want in a couple turns, you also have problems with hitting a card that you want before then, or immediately. So, I've been thinking that this may actually have been more important, and I've been wondering if it was even more important before the patch. Things were a little bit different then, of course. One thing being that Aquamarine was not an uncommon gem, it was a common gem. So having a Twin Slam combo with Aquamarine and the Dexterity gem was not that uncommon. It happened very often that you get those together and make you make your Twin Slam basically into a dash, the silent card. 14 damage, 14 block. And because those were both commons, it was very, very easy to make that work. So having that upgrade might have had some merit on Twin Slam, because that means that you can get that combo very easily, since you had a 50-50 chance of getting one of those two gems at the start of the game. Aside from that, though, you also didn't have the new starting relic, which gives you gear up, which means that you weren't able to enter defensive with curl up gear up in hand. Oops, there goes my phone. Anyway, since you didn't have that, you had to rely on taking other cards that braced in order to even enter defensive for the first time in a fight. The new starter relic solves that, but back then, I very often found myself short of the brace I needed to enter defensive. And if I had upgraded curl up, that would give me 2 more brace. And the nice thing about that is that that's only 8 away from entering defensive for the first time in a fight, which you can achieve by taking a roll attack, or one of the 2 uncommon cards that brace 8, Shield Spikes and Resilient Plate. And the odds of that are not too bad. You could also take a couple of the brace 3 cards that upgrade to brace 4, and then between all those upgrades you could enter defensive that way too. And having a little bit more brace in the early game helps too, because you're taking some chip damage sometimes, so you may even be able to enter defensive with less than 20 brace in the deck, and make up for it with taking damage. I think this has become easier since the patch a little bit because of Strike for Strike, which does self-damage, and if you don't have block, then you can use that to enter defensive by bracing manually through HP loss. But anyways, I think the benefits of having a chosen card into Stasis is a lot higher than I thought, and maybe if I were to go back in time and play on the older patch, and play those early episodes again, I might actually prioritize upgrading Curl Up. Because, especially now, I'm realizing that I'm not upgrading Twin Slam very early a lot of the time. I'm waiting for a second gem to come in. Part of that is influenced by not having a early act campfire like Downfall mode has. But that hasn't stopped me from waiting to upgrade Twin Slam. Because once I get to that first fire, I often have better upgrades to do, and a Twin Slam upgrade isn't that appealing whenever you don't have another gem to put in it. It's already doing less damage than a strike, and upgrading Twin Slam means that it's doing 1 more damage than a strike, and you don't really care about having 7 damage cards in the deck, except Temporal Strike, which can sometimes discount itself. That's also why Incinerate was buffed, to do more damage, because 7 is really abysmal. But yeah, that's my new perspective on Curl Up. I think that this card is it's very tough to see the value in this, because it kind of just does nothing the turn you have it unless you have Gear Up. But having experience with this, I think that this is much higher value than I thought, and I may start upgrading it earlier in the game than I have been. Or if I go back to Downfall mode, I might experiment with upgrading that at the first fire. I'm not the kind of person that recalls at the first fire as Guardian. I think getting an upgrade early is really important to surviving the early act. There is also the fact, though, that I don't need this upgrade to enter defensive with Bronze Gear's Gear Up. But that being said, I think it's still important. The past couple episodes especially, I've noticed that I sometimes wait a long time to play Gear Up, depending on the cards I have. I don't think that this is bad because of that. It's still good to have the 10 brace on demand to enter defensive when you need. But sometimes I've had in hand Curl Up and Roll Attack, and having the Curl Up upgrade would be nice to enter defensive since I only have 3 energy and I want to play the Roll Attack for damage. So having that ability to enter defensive with those 2 cards I think is still very important. Anyways, I hope that all made sense. None of that was prepared. What's next? Planning. This was a card that I used to really like, and I don't think I've taken for a long time, actually. Place the top 2 cards of your draw pile into Stasis. I mentioned before about filling your Stasis slots, and this thing is very, very good at that. However, it's kind of a little too good, and it comes at a price, because this is extremely, I don't want to say chaotic, volatile. It's another word. Uncontrolled? Sure. It's a very uncontrolled fashion of putting cards into Stasis. And similar to Curl-Up's, unupgraded Curl-Up's flaws that we just talked about, not having the right cards in Stasis is actually a bigger deal than I thought. So the fact that this takes up Stasis slots and is uncontrolled means that this card falls off as the game goes on, because the uncontrolled nature makes it harder to use in late game. But because it also takes up 2 Stasis slots, it means that you can't use your better Stasis cards to fill your slots most of the time. So I feel like this card has gone down a lot in value for me. It does have a socket and upgrades to 2 sockets. I feel like this upgrade maybe not even worth it. It depends on what gems you have. I guess if you have some powerful gems like Quartz, Citrine, it might be. But I don't think that this is a very good card anymore. I'd rather actually take a suspension and upgrade it to draw. There's also pre-program as the other 0 cost that takes a card from your draw pile and puts it into Stasis of your choice. That gives you a lot of extra utility that you don't get from planning. So yeah, I think that this card may just be bad. Unless you have some way to gain extra stasis slots and really, really need to fill them, I don't think this is great. Especially in the late game, another big problem, other than the fact that not having the right cards come out of stasis for later, you could end up putting the wrong cards in stasis, such as your scaling cards, which you really want to play early on. And it gets worse with the higher cost they are. Like if you somehow have a Fierce Bash run, sure, having it in stasis is nice, but you're going to miss out on that bit of early damage, and in fights with minions that could matter. I guess that's not a great example because you want the scaling anyways, so getting that to 0 cost out is not the worst. I guess a better one would be if you're in like an Act 2 situation and you have Giga Beam and that hits Giga Beam, you're suddenly in a lot worse position. Or you could hit like a 2 cost power, like Stasis Engine, that you would really want to get out early. Stasis Engine's a good example. The earlier you have that, the more value you can get from the extra energy and draw. So, and that's happened to me a lot actually. Putting cards into stasis that I would want to play earlier than later. Brace cards, I guess, are another good example. Getting you into defensive mode faster means you're safer. So I've stopped taking this card. It's not really a... It's not been a... What do you call it? A conscious choice. It's just been me evaluating the card in each situation and being like, you know what, I don't really want the downsides of this. I want control over my stasis, and we have plenty of stasis opportunities that I can take later, such as suspension and pre-program and all that. Alright, up next is Recover. We've covered this card before in the defensive mode thing. We talked about how Brace 3/Brace 4 mattered with the brace numbers. But place a card from your discard card pile into stasis. The main problem with this card is that its main effect is very weak. Gain 5 block, that's a defense worth of block. Yeah, it doesn't do very much. It's okay, I guess, but place a card from your discard pile into stasis is the big thing. Its front-loaded effect is not good, but since you're choosing a card from your discard pile, you are either looking at a very large pile of cards and getting to choose any of them, or you get to replay a card. You basically get to replay a card that's in your hand. So even if you draw Recover early, you can play a card and recover it, and then you get to play it again in a couple turns. And that kind of duplication effect is really powerful because, you know, STS is all about synergies, and if you have a card and it has synergies with other stuff in your deck, then getting to play that card twice benefits from those synergies twice. So duplication effects are very powerful in this game in general, and this is no exception. It's very similar to Hologram in that way, except you don't have to pay an energy cost to play that card that you're bringing back. You do have to wait, but most of the time I don't think that's a huge issue, and that's kind of the theme of Stasis anyway. You can afford to wait, and the wait pays off big time. But Hologram has a problem where you have to pay 1 energy to bring the card back, and then you have to pay the energy cost of that card again. So it's sometimes a little bit difficult to use, despite it has, but even despite that, it has very good utility. This is no exception. I've started to value this card a bit higher. I know some people disagreed with my original take on this card when I made the original tier list, that since this was a common block card, Guardian doesn't really need common block cards, so this card's not great, especially as a defense worth of block. I've since come around. I think that they did know that this was a more powerful effect than I had thought originally. So yeah, this is a very good... So this is like the antithesis to planning, right? You have all this control over stasis, and you can create very powerful... you can create a very powerful turn for yourself in a couple turns when the card comes out, as opposed to planning, which what you get is what you get. Reroutes. I would say this is a bit weaker than Recover, just in a vacuum. I don't, aside from the gain 5 block versus deal 9 damage thing. This is good in the early game. I think it's a little bit better than. I think it has a small advantage over recover for that reason. The fact that you can. The fact that you're building into your damage to take on elites and also kill hallway fights faster. Place the next card you play this turn into Stasis. I always thought that this effect was very good. I think it's a little bit worse than I thought, but not by much. It turns out a lot of cards are very restricted that you can put into Stasis. Having control over which cards in your hand go into Stasis and be able to play them is very much in the realm of Recover, that you can play a card twice. So that's still powerful. It's just more difficult because you have to pay the energy cost of this and the other card immediately, in that order. Meanwhile, with Recover, you don't have to care about card order as much. A couple things that this has over Recover, other than the fact that it does damage, is its socket. So as a 1-cost attack, you can put a gem into it and use it as a setup card, or maybe put a ward or something into it. You can get just some generic gem value. The other thing is that, what was I going to say? Multi-beam, I think was the other thing I was going to say. You can put multi-beam into Stasis if you have this in hand by playing Reroute Multi-beam. And Multi-beam, we'll talk about that in a bit, but it benefits from being in Stasis. Meanwhile, you can't do that with Recover. If you have Multi-beam and Recover in the same hand, you play Multi-beam for all your energy, and then you can't use Recover because it costs 1. Overall, I think this is a pretty okay card. I've had a run or two where I've tried to fill up my Stasis slots with Reroute, and it turns out having a 1-cost common attack in the late game is not very good. I could not make the Stasis make up for this being a 1-cost common attack by then. Common attacks really fall off in the late game unless you have strength to back them up. So I think I would actually rather have Recover by then. But this is still okay. If you're looking for damage in the early game, or if you have a synergy like Multi-beam specifically, or some other card that acts similarly, like maybe some kind of Accelerate card. Oh yeah, I should talk about that. Then this is your card. I talked about combos earlier. I actually forgot about this interaction. If you play Reroutes and then a card that accelerates, that card that accelerates will go into Stasis and then accelerate itself. It's crazy and awesome. I love that interaction. Most of the time it happens on Twin Slam with the Accelerate gem. And then you can play the second Slam to accelerate it out immediately. You get all your gem value. It's really cool. So yeah, I think this is weaker. I think this falls off compared to Recover in the late game. It's good for early game because of the damage, and it also has some niche interactions that you should keep your eye out for. So never ever in Spire declare a card as universally bad or universally good. There's always a use case. If you have followed this channel and seen my tier list, you would know that Ancient Construct is at the bottom of my tier list. I had a run with it, episode 60 recently. Actually, that was my last video, wasn't it? Yeah, because this comes out right after episode 60. Yeah, you should check out that episode. We make some interesting things happen with it. So yeah, never discount a card just because its quote unquote overall value is weaker. There's always something strong about it you can take advantage of. All right, up next. Not that one yet. What's the next one? What card? It's probably Suspension. Yep, Suspension. Place a card from your hand into Stasis socket. Just got some water. So first thing about this, I'll actually talk about the 0 cost and the socket. Great for putting setup gems into it, like strength or dexterity, as well as stuff that likes being cheap, like quartz, the draw gem. So if you put those into it, creates very good setup. The big downside of this card is the fact that kind of similar to some other energy cards in the base game, actually. This takes away 2 cards from your draw, and even in the early game, that's kind of bad because you're sacrificing a draw to get this card, and then you're sacrificing a second draw with whatever card you put into stasis. So then you're left with only 3 cards in your hand for however much energy you have. Now sometimes on 3 energy that's okay, but oftentimes I would rather have that 5th card option, so this can end up being bad. However, the devs kind of fixed this by putting on the upgrade draw card. And by the way, the draw card happens before you choose a card, so once you upgrade this, you get an additional choice to even put into stasis. This makes the card worth it. You get that 5th choice back, and then you can spend your energy. However, the control over which cards in your hand goes into stasis is good. This is something that Reroute doesn't have because you don't have to pay the energy cost of that card. So you can just put Multi-Beam back into stasis for free without playing it. It's also a thing that Recover can't do, because Recover can't put Multi-Beam back into stasis unless it's in the discard. The big flaw about this card is that it's a cantrip. It's a 0-cost draw card and it doesn't exhaust. So in theory, you can create infinites with this, and that's not a great attribute to have on a common card. They are thinking of fixing that at some point. I wonder what they're going to do with it. But regardless, the balance of this card is basically, without an upgrade, it's kind of risky because of you're underutilizing your energy per turn. But with an upgrade, it's pretty darn good. And the control over what you put into stasis is, as always, very important. At least in my opinion. I wonder if there's some kind of random stasis strategy that I haven't figured out yet. Like, if I can just spam cards like crazy into stasis. Maybe that's why we have stuff like Time Capacitor and Stasis Strike. Maybe I'm underutilizing that. We'll have to learn naturally as this series goes on. Or as the 100 game series goes on. I guess this is technically a different series. Alright, moving on. Clone. We're in the uncommons now. Clone. Choose a card, place a copy of that card into stasis. This is kind of, actually very similar to Suspension, but it costs 1. And the effect is essentially doubling a card for the rest of combat. You have to wait for the second card, and I feel like this card is actually not that great. Despite it being very similar to Suspension, it also costs 1, which is actually a pretty big deal. You also have to wait for the... So this is like the one case where waiting for a card is not great. Other than, I guess, the planning fiasco if you put the wrong card into stasis. If you're cloning a card, you're looking to essentially double the value of a card in your deck. You're looking to take a card that's one of your more powerful cards, and then take advantage of the fact that you have 2 of them. But you can't really do that well if you have to wait for the second copy of the card. If you don't have a very specific strategy that likes having 2 copies of a card, even if they're not in the same hand or can't combo together, then this is basically, like I said, a suspension that costs 1. And I feel like that's not very good. The upgrade makes this better at what it does. It accelerates. I wonder if the devs kind of understood that this was the case. That you would like to have the card out faster if you're copying it. I think that this card would very much benefit from having that accelerate at base, I guess, and then accelerating twice on the upgrade. But regardless, I haven't found very much use for this. My best use for it so far, I don't even remember the specifics, but I've used it a couple times when I was lacking in scaling. So I figured that having a copy of a card of my choice in my deck would kind of count as scaling. And that's kind of paid off a couple times. But yeah, I feel like using this card is very difficult. This is the area, like I said, that's like, everything is ultimately my opinion. I haven't found a great use case for this card yet. maybe I'm underutilizing it. Maybe there's a better way to take advantage of it that I'm not seeing. But if you can't see any value in this card either, I would probably steer away from it most of the time. Always keep your eye out for something, but don't just take this on faith. Alright, what's next? Future Plans. Probably my favorite Stasis card. At the end of your turn, place up to one card in your hand into Stasis. You get a suspension every turn. Okay, I'm going to quit with the comparison to suspension. This is its own thing. Putting a card from your hand into Stasis every turn is really, really powerful. Most of the time this is going to end up taking 2 slots of your 3 Stasis slots, because you'll put a 1-cost card in. Then next turn it'll be 1 time left, and then you'll put another 1-cost card in. Then the next turn, that first 1-cost card comes out, and then you put another 1-cost card in. So it kind of stays constant at having 2 cards in, unless you put a card that has higher cost than 1. So it's going to take up 2 of your Stasis slots. However, the amount of control that you get from this is amazing. How do I even put this? You're kind of... I don't think there's much room. There is some room for saving a card for a future turn, rather than playing it on a turn that you would like to play it anyways. Basically, you're making sure that any card that you fail to play during your turn, you still get the value from a couple turns later. And that's a big thing. So like if you're in Act 1, like I've taken this card on floor 1 before, even though it's a power that takes time to come into play. If you're in Act 1 and you start taking attacks, you're gonna end up with some hands being oversaturated in the amount of energy you have. Like you'll have like a roll attack, you'll have a roll attack, you'll have a reroute, and then you'll have a strike and defend. You have 4 energy worth of attacks in hand, but only 3 energy. So you play the 3 energy of cards you want to play, and then Future Plans has your back for the remaining 1. So like if the enemy is attacking, you play roll attack, defend to full block and enter defensive, and then you use Future Plans to put the reroute back into Stasis. And then not only are you keeping that 9 damage for later that you missed out on this turn, you're also setting up your the Stasis from reroute for a future turn. So you're not missing out on that either. Aside from that, you can also plan out your turn around that and save. And because you know that you can save those cards, you can choose to play other things on the turn that you have it in play. And then plan around those future turns. At the very least, even if you don't have anything in your hand that you really absolutely want to play later, like maybe you have 2 defends in hand, you play your... Let's see. Well, actually... Let's say you have only defense in hand after you play your attacks. You still get a defense worth of value in a couple turns. Also, you can say no if you're going to fill up your Stasis slots anyway. So... this kind of has like all the upsides of the control, plus all the upsides of planning, just having raw value. Overall, this card, despite it not giving you value for however many turns, it still ends up being very powerful. It looks like well-laid plans from Silent. It's even got the plans at the end. You basically retain cards, but this is different because you can keep... because not only are you keeping cards, you're getting that value for free. And that's the whole point of Stasis in the first place. You get to play extra cards for free. So yeah, this is insane scaling value despite not giving you damage or block directly, or scaling that up in any way. You're just playing your cards, you're just playing more of your cards with this. Anyway, highly recommend. Its upgrade is innate, which is awesome. The earlier that you get these Stasis into play, the better. The sooner you'll get those benefits. With innate powers, though, I don't usually upgrade until the end of Act 2. Usually, Act 2 bosses are fine with you having an innate power on turn 1, but all your hallways and elites will not like that. They hit very hard turn 1. But yeah, the Act 2 boss and Act 3 and Act 4, this is absolutely fine. Let's see, what's up next? Orb support. That's not it. This is it. Another card I don't like very much at all. Innate, deal 8 damage, put a random card from your draw pile into stasis. I already had problems with this card because it's like Backstab. Backstab is a very good card, but only because it's on silent. She has an extra 2 draw per turn and has a lot of problems with front load. Guardian has some problems with doesn't have as much problems with front load as Silent has, because they can stall turns more effectively with their defensive mode. So they don't, and this doesn't even do enough damage to dispatch an enemy in Act 1 or Act 2 quickly enough to be relevant. But aside from that, I'm just now noticing that, based on everything that we've just said about control versus random stasis, put a random card from your draw pile into stasis isn't that great. And it might be tempting to say that this is thinning your draw pile, it's getting your draw faster. It's actually not, because you've taken this card and put it in your deck. And because it's an 8, you're always drawing it before these other cards. I've heard arguments that this gets your stasis synergies online, but in my experience, those are very few and far between. Like, the extent of that is like Temporal Strike, Stasis Engine, floating orbs now. But all of those you can just find better cards to do stuff. So anyways, I'm not a big fan of this at all. The randomness means that you can put the wrong card into stasis, or just a card that doesn't give you very much when it comes out. In fact, both of those things have happened in the one run where I did take this, because I was desperate to beat Ironclad 1. It did not pay off at all. And I don't think I made mistakes in my other deck building choices, so it wasn't just that. I'm very much trying to be gracious towards every card, because I know there's always a situation. I just have not found a situation for this card yet. I will eventually if I keep playing this character, but overall, I would say avoid this card. Not a fan. It doesn't really help you do anything it doesn't really help you do anything important, except nerf your turn 1 draw. And turn 1 draw is really important, because you need to get your important stuff out that turn. What next? The last one. Pre-program. The last card that puts other cards into stasis, I believe. Look at the top 4 cards of your draw pile, choose one and place it into stasis. Very similar vein to Recover, in which you have a card that's putting cards into stasis from a pile other than your hand. And that's kind of a uniquely good thing in the first place. It means that you're getting cards that you don't have normally. This one especially, you're getting cards that you haven't drawn yet, which is great. Recover is getting cards that you don't have anymore. Basically, any cards that you don't have in your hand right now, I think that kind of control is very good. So, aside from the fact that it puts a card from your draw pile into stasis, it also lets you look at the top 4 cards, or upgraded, the top 7 cards. So you get to see what your next hand is in a way, and get to control that in a way too, by taking away one of those cards. You get to save one of those cards for a future turn. Some other uses that I do, though, is I grab a 0-cost card or Multi-Beam, the X-cost card, and that essentially gives me 1 extra draw, because that card will come out immediately next turn. So I draw the 5 cards, and I get the card that I put into stasis for a total of 6 card draw. Other than that, though, I can kind of figure out how I'm going to play my next turn, and then what card I'm going to, and then see what cards I don't want anymore, and I can just pick the rest of that. That's usually pretty good. I think the 0-cost / multi-beam strategy ends up being a little bit weaker, but it's still good, a good use of this. One of my favorite ways to use this card, though, is to socket a quartz into it, so that after I look at the top cards of my draw pile, I draw a card. So I basically get to choose which of the two top cards I draw off the quartz. I can't do any better than that. I can either take the top card off the draw pile, or I can put that card into stasis and draw the next one. Either way, it's really good, I think. And I would take this any day over planning, I think. The control over stasis, as well as knowing the next card, your next turn, is really good. And it fills up one stasis slot, and because of how many stasis things you have available to you, you can just find another source if you're not filling up your stasis slots. So I think you can afford to be picky about what you put into your deck, about how you use your stasis. So yeah, anyway, I really like this card. I think it definitely fits its uncommon value. Alright, up next, cards that put themselves into stasis. This is an interesting category because this is less about getting card value for free and more about just kind of playing with the concept of stasis in general. Charge Core puts itself into stasis every turn, or every time a timer goes down, it draws a card. That's what tick means. So either at the beginning of your turn, or whenever you use Accelerate, it will draw a card. And then whenever timer reaches 0, it will exhaust. That's what Volatile means. Overall, good front-loaded damage. 10 is above average for a card that costs 1, has an external effect. It also upgrades to 15 because it exhausts in stasis. I don't take this card very often, but I know that drawing cards passively is really good. Especially because you're drawing cards on turns that you didn't spend an energy on this card. So the next 2 turns, you're drawing cards. I feel like this is not that great in Act 1 most of the time because it exhausts. And whenever you're taking on elites, you want to be able to play your larger attacks multiple times. Just because fights end up taking that long. I guess maybe Knob is sometimes an exception, but with Guardian, you have to kind of take an extra turn anyway. In the late game, though, I don't remember very many times taking this in the first place, but I know that this card exhausting itself means that you don't have a 1-cost common attack in your deck anymore, and also it's drawing extra cards, which means it does eventually go draw positive, and that's great. Getting to your cards faster and having more options in a turn at the same time, you just have to wait. I think that's very good. Overall, though, I still don't end up taking this card very often for the Act 1 reasons. And by the time we get to the late game, I don't really want to be taking extra cards I don't need. And the fact that this doesn't go draw positive until the second turn after you play it doesn't really entice me to think that this is the kind of card you want to take by then. So it's kind of in this weird space where I think the card is good. It's just not good in either situation that you normally take it. In Act 1 for being a common attack, or in the late game for drawing cards. Maybe I undervalue it, though. Maybe this is kind of like Jorbs' Pommel Strike. He loves taking Pommel Strike. He thinks it's probably one of the best common attacks on Ironclad because it has late game value and does decent damage in the early game. I think he's right. It's just that this doesn't... I don't think that this does what you want it to do. I think I'm missing a use case here, but I think when I'm presented with an opportunity for this to be good, I'll do it. In a recent episode, I think in one of the last 2 I recorded, which is 61 and 62, I've done those recordings already. I have taken a Charge Core a bit later in the game to get that extra draw. I think once I'm presented with more opportunities, though, I'll know what... I'll figure out how good this exactly is. Draw a card in general, though, just isn't the kind of effect that sounds amazing to me. So yeah, I don't know about this card. It takes up a stasis slot for a couple turns, just like 1-cost cards do. something to keep in mind. What's really funny about this, though, is that it's kind of good upgraded if you already have a lot of other stasis stuff, because then this is a 15 damage card. If you fill your other stasis slots, this will just discard instead of going into stasis because your stasis slots are full. So then you can use it multiple times for just raw damage. So I guess that's also a use case. If you have a lot of stasis and you upgrade this card, you get 15 damage for 1 energy. That's pretty, it's pretty efficient. Alright, up next. Shield Charger. One of my favorites. Although I have been taking this less recently too, I think it's still very good. This card used to be absolutely insane. This card is place itself into stasis for 2 energy, which means it doesn't give you any benefit the turn you play it, and it costs 2 energy. That seems pretty ew at first, but every turn after that you gain 10 block for 3 turns, and you also brace 4. And it's volatile, just like Charge Core. So if you can find another way to put this into stasis, or you just find an opportunity to spend the 2 energy without getting slapped for it, this card will do so much for you. Reminder, 30 block is as much as an impervious. It won't block all at once, but having the block spread out means that you're safe for the next few turns. And that safety is really, really good. And it only gets better once you find other ways to put it into stasis, like suspension or future plans. Those two especially. Recover and pre-program can also do that if they're in the draw or discard pile. This is the kind of card that, since it gives you consistent block over multiple turns, it's good for stopping chip damage. But also because it goes away, it falls off later into a fight. So you want to use this for, so basically you're getting this block for just a few turns. So you kind of need to ration these if you're using them. If you're not using them though, take one. You'll find that you can pay this 2 energy cost more often than you think. Last thing I guess I have to say about this is that the Brace 4 is good. The upgrade especially doesn't give you that much more block, but the Brace 6 is very relevant. The later in the game you get, the more block you're going to need, which means that Shield Charger won't be as complete in its safety. You'll still need to play other stuff. It'll still be good, but the Brace especially is what gets you, what really helps in the late game. Because aside from the block that you're already getting, which is still a lot, you're much more able to enter defensive mode. Gaining this Brace over time gives you some kind of control over your Brace per turn, which means that you can enter defensive when you want, but also you can get there faster without having to pay any extra energy on these turns. And these Brace numbers can matter. Even just getting 1 proc of Brace 4 means that you need 16 more to get into defensive, which is 2 roll attacks or shield spikes, or what's the other one? Resilient Plate. Those are all Brace 8 cards, so if you play 2 of those, you get into defensive with this, or you can take some damage. Or you can do Gear Up and any one of those Brace 8 cards, and that'll get you into it too. With 2 ticks, then you only need 12 Brace, which is Curl Up Plus. Or Gear Up plus a 3 Brace card. So yeah, there are certain thresholds that this hits that you can look out for, and then that will put you into defensive and make you even more safe. So yeah, overall, very good. And in the late game, Brace 6, I think the thresholds are a lot less useful, and just the raw Brace numbers get you into defensive faster and more often. This goes from a total of 12 to a total of 18. So yeah, don't sleep on Shield Charger. Try and take it if you're lacking in defense, and take it if you have ways to put cards into stasis. I think the one thing I would say is maybe avoid it with Accelerate, or avoid Accelerate when you have it, because this card very often makes it into your first slot on the right, and then Accelerate uses up more of that block, and you might not need it. Sometimes you will. The further you get into the game, the more you will actually need that block, and having that as front load with Accelerate is actually very good. but earlier in the game you'd rather have that block spread out, because the attacks will be smaller. You'll notice that the bottle icon is there. We'll talk about the relics in a bit later. Let's see. What's next? Sentry Blast. I've said that this card puts itself into stasis. I'm counting it as that because it does come back. Sentry Blast puts Sentry Wave into stasis. Sentry Wave puts Sentry Blast into stasis. So this is a kind of consistent damage card. I think it's kind of like a jack of all trades, but it does well. It's a stasis synergy. It's good with strength. There's a synergy with the zero cost card package. You also get some weaken every other turn. Every other turn weaken is really good in prolonged fights. Having your opponent be weak half the time is really strong. Also, this is Guardian's only source of weak, which begs the question, why is that? The answer is because Guardian already blocks for a lot. So having weak on top of that makes it even better. Especially because Guardian has defensive mode, and you can control when you enter defensive mode, so it's really, really hard to overblock with weaken. You can just save that block for another turn and then be absolutely fine. The upgrade is a little bit more damage and brace 2. This is an average of 1 more damage per turn and 1 more brace per turn. Sometimes you can hit thresholds with this, that's important. Longer fights, this can end up bracing for, I guess, as much as gear up. Like in boss fights, you end up spending however many turns in the fight, so I guess keep that in mind. Usually the brace doesn't matter. There are some small cases where it does. Or sometimes this extra damage doesn't matter, but if you need more scaling damage, then this can matter, especially at the end of Act 1. Otherwise, this upgrade's not great, but this card is generally pretty good. I don't think that this leans super heavily into stasis other than those zero-cost synergies we'll talk about later, but it is important to remember, though, since it is a stasis card, it will take up a stasis slot every turn. So you're essentially losing a stasis slot permanently. So just keep that in mind with how much stasis stuff you're taking and how much stasis stuff you want to take. If you have cards that would be better than this that you can put into stasis, maybe don't take this. Alright, up next. Fierce Bash. A rare. 3 energy, deal 18 damage, place this into stasis. Every time the timer ticks down, increase this card's damage by 2. It is a 3-cost card, so putting itself into stasis, it will go into stasis for 4 turns. A couple things wrong with this card, because I do not believe that this is a very good card. 18 damage for 3 energy. Bludgeon does 32. This is already about half of what a 3-cost card should be doing. So it's really bad front load, and the fact that it costs 3 means that it's taking up most of your energy on the turn. So most of the time, so the use cases are really like if you can put it into stasis, or if you get with another source like suspension, future plans, or all those other things that I talked about, shield charger, pre-program, recover, all that. Or another use case is if you just get lucky enough to be able to play it on a turn that an enemy's not attacking. Or in cases like Snecko Eye, or anything that you can use to discount the card to make it more playable at first. Another big problem about this is that since it costs 3, you're not playing other cards in your hand, and if you're, playing the game, you're going to be adding other cards to your deck that are better than your strikes and defense, and drawing this with those cards feels really bad. This is why I like 2-cost cards a lot more than 3-cost cards in general. So, like, for example, on Ironclad, I favor Carnage over Bludgeon a lot. Some people really like Bludgeon. Definitely not trying to discount their opinions. I just think Carnage is better, because then you can choose another card in your hand to play as well. The other thing wrong with this is the fact that its stasis costs 4 turns. Like, even in boss fights, you're only going to play this a total of 3 times. because the first play plus the second play plus the third play is 1 turn plus 4 turns plus 4 turns. 9 turns to play this 3 times. And playing this 3 times means that this is 18 plus 26 plus 34. And that's a total of 78 damage. That's decent, but not rare level. Not rare level at all. The best use case for this, other than being able to put it into stasis or discount it, is having accelerate. If you have a very accelerate heavy deck, if you can create combos with this with accelerate, then this card can be good. But most of the time you're only going to take this if you're desperate for scaling. Other times this is just going to be dead weight. Your fights will take way too long. This will cost way too much and make you too vulnerable on the turn you draw it. I hope this card gets a buff. It somehow missed the round of buffs in the last patch. Can't hit everything though, I guess. We'll get there eventually. Alright, up next, Laser Turret. Deal 5 damage, place this into stasis. Stasis lasts 4 turns. Tick, deal 5 damage to a random enemy. So every time when it's in stasis, it's doing damage to random enemies. This used to actually be more damage, but it was apparently OP. I understand. Did this get nerfed last patch, or was it before I started? I feel like this was I think this was actually before I started this the 100 game analysis series. This is pretty good. This is actually the better version of Fierce Bash, I would say. The random targeting is not the best, but it does consistent damage. It scales with strength. Once it comes, it lasts in stasis, so it always takes up a stasis slot, because once it comes out, you can just put it back in immediately at 0 cost, and then it'll go back in for another 4 turns. So just like, I guess Fierce Bash, but also the one I actually mentioned, Sentry Blast, it will always take up a stasis slot. It's a pretty big downside, because you want to put your other cards into stasis to discount them, but having consistent damage from this, especially if you can scale strength, is really good. Even if you can't, this does a lot of damage. And just like Fierce Bash, having any kind of accelerate makes this very good. It's cheap to play, which means that it's also not hindering your other cards in hand. Yeah, all those things considered, I think it's a pretty good card. Good for scaling damage, good for front load. Or I guess not front load, I guess for mid. I guess for anything that's not supposed to be like a really short fight, it's good in. It can last in medium length fights or long fights and be good. And then there's Stasis Field. Stasis Field gains 6 block. Place this into stasis. There's no period on that. I think it's been reported before as a bug. When this leaves stasis, gains 6 block. So this has this unique ability where it'll place itself into stasis. You'll get it back out at 0 cost, but it essentially doubles its block. So the first time you play it, you gain 6 or 8 block, and then whenever it comes out of stasis in 2 turns, and you replay it, you get 6 plus 6 or 8 plus 8, and you're getting that every 2 turns. This is a very, very powerful defensive system card. You can basically make a defensive system with this and just a few other pieces, and you'll be very safe. Like Accelerate, Dexterity, a second Stasis Field, or you can even pair it with Sentry Blast to alternate which turn you're getting block and which turn you're weakening. It does take up a stasis slot, but most of the time I'm willing to sacrifice a stasis slot to have this, because block is generally more powerful than damage, and having consistent block makes you safe, and the longer you stall, the more damage you're going to do anyways most of the time. So yeah, very good card. Next, the Accelerate cards. I'm starting to lose my voice. I hope I make it through this. Incinerate. Deal 9 damage, Accelerate socket. Upgrades to Accelerate twice. This used to only ever accelerate once. Last patch it got buffed to accelerate twice, which is nice. It's another 1-cost common attack that has a socket. But unlike most of the other ones, this actually does not fall off as much. Despite the fact that you are spending 1 energy on small amounts of damage against enemies with hundreds of HP, you're getting cards out of stasis. And that means that you're essentially getting back cards that make you safe, in a way. Like, if you have block cards, then this is essentially a block card too. Block cards in stasis, then this is a block card too, because you're getting those out of stasis and playing them for block. Also, it's good for creating stasis combos, as mentioned earlier. Incinerate's great with Fierce Bash or Laser Turret. It's also just good for having more control over what's in your stasis. If you can consistently put a lot of things into stasis, then having Incinerate means that you can get that stuff out and get that value earlier and faster. So just a good raw damage, raw value card. Most of the time, I would say if you have only Curl Up in your deck for stasis, then maybe don't take an Accelerate card yet. You want to have... It's kind of like taking Bane before you have Poison. You're kind of just banking on it happening. But this, I think, if you're in a pinch, if you're not offered very good damage cards, you can take this and then build into stasis, and you'll get some value out of it anyway. What next? Temporal Shield. Right, that's another Accelerate card. As a block card, you're kind of just taking this most of the time for either in the late game when you have Dexterity or need more Accelerate in your deck, or at the end of Act 1 in preparation for Act 2. It's a common block card. That's pretty much what I have to say about it. It has some niche uses. Most of the time I don't think I would take this unless in those very specific situations, like the end of Act 1, or heading into late game with Dexterity or a need for Accelerate. Because this does not upgrade to Accelerate twice, it's just more block. I think it's an okay card though. 8 block is, like, Defend Plus is a good amount of block, and 11's very respectable. It's actually very close to Shrug It Off. It's got numbers, it's got a kind of draw, because Accelerate gives you a card. Sometimes. The one main thing to remember about Accelerate though is that you're not guaranteed to get a card out of stasis. Most cards cost 1, so if you put a 1-cost card into stasis, then unless it's the turn after you put it in, then you can't get it out immediately. So if you're trying to create a stasis combo and you only have a card that accelerates once, you're still going to have to wait until next turn to get the card out. I guess that being said, if you're not trying to do that and you're just trying to get raw value, then most of the time this is going to actually be useful to have just 1 Accelerate. Because then you'll get that value out next turn, or if you draw it next turn, then you have 1 turn of stasis in the front slot pretty often. Although you can't really control when you draw these Accelerate cards anyway, and having Incinerate, I guess, without a second Accelerate can make you a little bit vulnerable. I guess Temporal Shield doesn't do that, since it's block already. Alright, up next is Amber. Amber, it's a pretty good gem. I don't think it's amazing, but it's pretty good value. I wouldn't rate it up there with, like, Quartz or stuff like that, but this also can create stasis combos. I guess everything that accelerates can. This in Twin Slam is one of my favorites because it guarantees you get 2 Accelerate out of a card. You can put this in Incinerate to make it accelerate 3 times. That's pretty big. Maybe even excessive sometimes, actually, because sometimes you just want to get cards out naturally and then you can't put stuff in stasis fast enough. I've had that happen a couple times. One thing I really like to do, though, is put this into a card that has stasis attached. Doesn't work with reroute because you have to play the next card, but this happens before that. But with suspension and planning, or pre-program, all of those put cards into stasis immediately, and then this accelerates. Also, I mentioned reroute with a reroute and then a card with accelerate, like Amber with Twin Slam, can create its own combo by accelerating itself from stasis if it's the only card in. So that's fun sometimes. I think in general this is a pretty good value gem. You're going to be taking stasis cards a lot in the game already. So if you're looking for just general value to add to a card, of any kind, really. I think this can work in most cards. Then this is your guy. I think the worst cards to put it into would be Reroute and Strike for Strike, though. Because Reroute you want to play at the beginning of the turn, and Strike for Strike you want to play at the end. So, well, actually, Reroute just... You want to play that before any cards are in stasis? Yeah. So, if you have most other situations, though, I would say this is a pretty good gem. And it's pretty good unsocketed, too, so you're not really taking much of a risk. It's kind of similar to Quartz in that way, in which case you're getting a card out of it, even though it's a zero-cost card with low impact. So, less of a risk than most gems. It does have that one thing, though, where if a card in the frontmost slot still has more than one turn, then you're not actually getting anything. So, the inconsistency, I think, makes it... is the reason why I don't think that's an amazing card. But otherwise, it's very good utility in general. Just have to be careful about how you use it. Alright, Emergency. Another card that I don't really use often, but for the opposite reason of these other Accelerate cards. Because this is the kind of card you want to use to accelerate multiple times, but you can't guarantee that will happen. In fact, a lot of the time, a card goes into stasis. By the time you draw this card, that will only have one turn left. Future Plans is a pretty good example of this, because that happens at the end of your turn. So yeah, this is kind of like taking an Amber, but you can't socket it. And even though you always get a card from it, you're hoping to get more value than that. I haven't really found a great use for this. The upgrade doesn't exhaust. There's always the expensive cards that you can get out of stasis. Like, if you have a lot of expensive stuff that you want to put into stasis, then maybe this is good. Fierce Bash and Laser Turret can be good with this. Maybe I'm undervaluing it, I don't know. But the times I've taken it, it hasn't felt that great. Maybe it's better with other stasis cards so that you can control what this accelerates. Maybe you're taking this so that you can get immediate value out of stuff you put into stasis every time. Because this is an advantage over Amber. You know that you're going to get a card out of stasis. By the way, just to clarify, the cards that are volatile, they count as leaving stasis when they exhaust. So you won't exhaust one of those and then get another card out. You'll just get that one. I might be undervaluing this. I'll have to look into it in future times. But I guess the time to look out for it is if you have stasis stuff but you have a problem with front load. If you have stasis support but have a problem with front load, you can take this to solve some of your front load issues. That being said, I do think it needs a lot of stasis support and maybe some other accelerate to make sure you're getting more than one accelerate out of it. Because you don't want to just put a raw Amber in your deck, I don't think. It's a little bit low impact, is what I'm trying to say. But not... I guess not untakeable. Anyway, next up is Time Bomb. This card was reworked in our last patch. It used to just put itself into stasis and then do damage to all enemies when it came out. It was like a 3-turn delay, just like the actual Exploder. Now it's an attack. 14 damage to all enemies. Accelerate all cards in stasis. Exhaust. I think very soon the bug with this will be patched, so I won't go over it. There's a bug with how much damage this card does. It benefits twice from... It gets affected twice by damage modifiers like Strength, Vulnerable, Weak, and all that. But should be patched. That should be fixed pretty soon after this, I think. At least in terms of my series, so I'm not going to give advice on how to abuse that. But yeah, as a 2-cost AoE card, I'm a big fan. I'm generally a big fan of AoE cards that cost 2 because they do a lot of damage AoE. It's very efficient. It's got that specific utility that you're looking for in a lot of runs to handle multi-enemy fights very easily. This can take out most of the HP on Gremlins in Act 1, and one-shot most slimes in the slime fight in Act 1, as long as you're not weakened. Accelerate all cards in stasis, historically for me has been a lot different than I thought it was. Thought it was going to be. excuse me. I thought that I was going to be able to like consistently accelerate 3 cards in stasis. Most of the time I'm getting like 1 or 2. The big thing though is that this can also create stasis combos, and interestingly, this has been the most consistent stasis comboer that I've used so far, despite it only being out for a short period of time. I take this card a lot, and then with the stasis cards I take later in the game, this still has continued utility. And since you're accelerating multiple cards at once, you can get multiple cards out, and then the 2 cost is not such a big deal in the late game. I like it with Shield Charger a lot, actually. In the late game, especially whenever you need more block, this is great because it will hit it no matter where it's at in stasis. Sometimes it's a bad thing, but you know, in the early game when it's a bad thing to accelerate the Shield Charger anyway, the AoE damage usually more than makes up for that. Especially because you're spending 2 energy on damage, having that safety attached is really good. It does exhaust, which means it does go away eventually. I think that makes sense. It's a pretty good way to balance the card. I think it's very strong. I think if you don't have AoE in your deck, you should probably take this card if it's offered. And it will continue to be relevant for the rest of the game. I guess the only downside I really have to say is just be careful about when you use it, because you might want the accelerate later. I've noticed that in a couple runs, where using Time Bomb too early was the wrong move. Or saving the Time Bomb for later was the right move. I have made that decision correctly sometimes. Up next, my notes. Having my notes on my phone means that it just keeps turning itself off. Speed Boost, that's a rare. So 1 cost, accelerate 3 times. If you think about it compared to, what do you call it, Incinerate Plus, this is only 1 more accelerate for the same cost. That wasn't always the case, of course, because Incinerate didn't used to accelerate twice. But this feels a little bit underpowered. You very much take this specifically for combos. Getting raw value out of your stasis is very difficult from this, because it accelerates so much. You would need a lot of stasis, you would need a lot of cards to put into stasis for this to really be necessary in any way that isn't combos. I think the fact that it's 1 cost accelerate 3 is kind of inefficient. I don't think it's that good for a rare. Most of the time I'm not happy to see this. The upgrade retains, which is kind of nice, but I'd rather have this at 0 cost. So if you're looking to if you're offered this at your boss, I probably would not take this unless you have very specific use for it. Like, you know that you're going to get value out of it. It's not going to give you value passively. That's all I'm going to say about that. Time Sifter is also kind of in the same vein where it's underpowered. But I think it does that consistent value thing better than Speed Boost. It's kind of the counter part to Speed Boost, actually, now that I think about it. Speed Boost is better at creating combos. This is better at just giving you raw value. If you have a lot of expensive cards that you're putting into stasis, or just in your deck in general, this can be pretty good. Or if you just have a lot of stasis support, then this can be okay. I think that it, similarly to Speed Boost, is a bit underpowered, because it only accelerates the first card in stasis. It doesn't accelerate all your cards. So it's not going to give you a lot of value. It'll just give you some value. It's probably closer to an uncommon in terms of power. Hopefully we'll get to see a buff for this too. One of the devs that helped with the last patch said that they didn't think that they needed to change this, but after a review they probably are going to. So we'll get to see a change. Yeah. Alright, and finally the miscellaneous group. This is all the synergy stuff, I think. Temporal Strike. Deal 7 damage, gain an energy back if you have a card in stasis, with a socket. This is not the most exciting card in the world to me, but it has some good uses. It being a 0 cost attack is pretty good. Essentially 0 cost. I made the comparison earlier with Bane and Poison for some other card. This is originally what I was going to say it about. If you only have Curl Up as your source of stasis, then this is often just going to be one energy, deal one more damage than strike, which is not good at all. Do not take this unless you know you're getting stasis, unless you know you have the stasis to support it. One more damage than a strike is not worth it. Zero cost attack is marginally better than a one cost common attack, but also kind of falls off later. So I don't think that you should even be taking this speculatively most of the time. That being said, if you are in a position to take this in the early game, or in some other situation, like maybe if you have Snecko Eye, because this gives you an energy back, it's technically better than most Snecko Eye, than most cards, then that's pretty good, because then it's still pretty good, because you have a socket, and that makes this this makes this essentially a zero cost socket card, which makes it good for setup. Like, I'll put a strength gem in this, even though it's an attack. I'll put a dex gem in this sometimes. I'll put a quartz in this since it draws a card for free. A lot of good stuff can be done with this. Accelerate can also... Actually, Accelerate's a really good thing, because if you're getting the benefit from this, then you know you're going to get a card out from Stasis. And you're only taking the card in the first place if you have the Stasis support for it. Overall, I tend to like zero-cost attack cards in the early game, since they're so efficient. You just need to make sure that you have the support, and that's not always available, because this does fall off in the late game. Up next, Floating Orbs. Another recent change. This used to give you just an Orb Slam, which was essentially a Shiv, but it's 2 damage 2 times, instead of 4 damage 1 time. Now, it's a synergy with zero-cost cards specifically. Notice that this doesn't have any direct synergy with Stasis, but it's still there. And in fact, it makes me wonder if I should have brought this up in the gem video, because all gems are zero cost as well. But anyway, whenever you play a zero cost card, deal 4 damage to a random enemy. Works with Stasis specifically because those cards always come out at zero cost. So if you have a lot of Stasis stuff, then this becomes a pretty good damage engine for something that you're already wanting to do. Notably, this doesn't work with volatile cards, so watch out for that. But you can also use gems to proc this and do some damage, so multiple sources, especially the Shiv and Ward gems. I guess since I didn't cover that there, I'll cover that here. This used to be like a zero cost 2 damage 2 times. It's easy enough to get strength for that to be like a singular scaling damage card. Now this is a lot more reasonable, but still very powerful under the right scenarios, if you build into it, or you have the support for it already. So, yeah, this is an alternate damage source. I haven't really gotten the chance to use this very much yet, I don't think. I'm looking forward to having the opportunity. The one thing I will say, though, is that using Stasis for Floating Orbs is actually somewhat difficult, because even if you're using your Stasis slots to the maximum, you're still only getting 1.5 cards out on average per turn. So it's not very much. You still have to kind of put some effort into making that work. The upgrade is 6 damage, which is significant, especially if you're using this as a damage system. This upgrade is very much needed and a good value. Alright, up next, Multi-Beam. I mentioned this a couple times. Deal 5 damage to all enemies X times. Tick increases cards damage by 1. Upgrades is 7 damage, and Tick increases it by 2. So overall, if you really need AoE, I would still take this. It's a bit weak, kind of like an unupgraded Whirlwind is a bit weak, but upgraded is much better. Also, Guardian likes taking energy relics in general, so this is still pretty good. This can end up being a damage system, because if you have Stasis support, you can put this into Stasis over and over until you can afford to play it. Maybe not an entire damage system, but still pretty good. Very good support. The damage increases a lot. With only 3 turns, you can get this to 13 damage. and 3 turns is not that long to wait. Future plans can put this into stasis, suspension, reroute, as I mentioned before. It also scales with strength, if you have strength as part of your deck, and vulnerable, which I take very often already. So if you wait 3 turns and have vulnerable, that's 19 damage per energy, and that's very good value. And the longer the boss fight goes, the stronger this gets. I've had a run or two where I have actually taken 2 of these, and then I put them into stasis and I juggle between them, playing them and putting them into stasis, and that has actually been a pretty successful, most damage, significant portion of my damage system. The one thing I think is weird about this is the fact that it's so weak as its first form. Like, it's not good front load and it's not good scaling. This increases cards damage by 1 is way too slow. Like, you wait, like 1 turn takes us to 6. In the early game when you don't have this upgraded, it's only 6 damage after 1 turn, and that's pretty much all you can afford to do at all anyways. I kind of wish that this got buffed in the unupgraded form. I think the upgraded form is good enough. I think it's a little bit. I think it's still a little bit weak in the front load department, but the scaling is definitely worth. Here, neither is good. So I guess if you're going to take it, you need either some strength for the first portion, or you need just any kind of AoE in general. But you should be looking to upgrade it in most circumstances. So just remember that. If you want to take this card, evaluate whether you have the resources to go without an upgrade. Most of the time you're not going to, so also look for a fire, and look at your other cards to see how much upgrade debt you're in, because you can only upgrade so many times. Alright, up next. Orb Walk. This is a bit of an interesting one. Gain 2 strength, tick, gain 1 strength, volatile. Unlike those other tick volatile cards, it doesn't put itself into stasis. You're paying 2 energy to gain 2 strength if you play it, which is very inefficient. Inflame is 1 energy, 2 strength. I think Inflame is a very powerful card to begin with, but not powerful enough to warrant 2 energy. This is the kind of thing that I would pay for directly if I was desperate for scaling, which it has happened sometimes, or if I can't afford to, if I don't have the resources to put it into stasis, or my enemies are having an off turn, so I can afford to play this, kind of like Fierce Bash. The example I made with Fierce Bash. If the enemies are not attacking, you have the opportunity to play this and just gain the strength immediately. It's still worth it in a way. It's a bit weak in my opinion to just play it, but since Guardian plays slower, strength is worth more on them than normal. So paying 2 energy for 2 strength can still pay off. It's not going to cripple you. The tick, gain 1 strength. You have to have some other way to put that into stasis. And because it's 2 cost, it will go into stasis for 3 turns before expiring. So you will get a total of 3 strength out of it if you put it into stasis. A bit of a higher payout than if you just played it, which kind of makes sense. I think it's a little bit too slow to just outright. I think in a vacuum it's too slow to choose over just playing it. So you kind of have to weigh the cost of playing the card versus the cost of putting it into stasis over another card. Sometimes you just don't play it. That's probably wrong, actually. I think 2 strength. If you take 2 strength, you need it to play it. One thing, the one really big redeeming value of this card is its upgrade. It gets rid of volatile, and that's really strange. Really strange way to upgrade a card, but it works. It very specifically wants you to put the card into stasis if you get rid of volatile. Because if it doesn't exhaust in stasis, you put it into stasis for 3 turns, you get that 3 strength, then it comes out at 0 cost. And then you get 2 more strength for 0 cost. So basically, first turn it goes into stasis, you get 1 strength. Second turn you get 1 strength. Third turn, 3 strength. Big burst of strength. And 5 strength is very significant. Ironclad can win a fight with 8 strength. Guardian can win with much less because of that factor I just said, where strength is worth more because you can stall for longer. I don't think 5 is the number, and I think with how slow that is, you might need a bit more. But this can be the majority of your damage scaling, and it'll work, so long as you play around it. I think this is a bit difficult as a card to make work. If you really need the strength, you should take it. But if you can manage to make it work, it's worth the payout. I personally don't like the card that much because of how difficult it is to work with, but its usage is undeniable. Alright, up next, Stasis Strike. This was changed. It used to be a rare 1 cost, deal 9 damage, but now it's uncommon, making it easier to find. It deals 15 damage and is 2 energy to gain 1 stasis slot. I actually really like this change, balance-wise. It does make the card a bit worse, because it's harder to gain a stasis slot now. I think it was necessary to do so. But this is okay damage. 15 damage may strike you as being a little bit low for 2 cost, but again, this is Guardian. You can afford lower numbers. It's kind of similar to how Roll Attack is good damage, despite only being 16 for 2 energy. 15 for 2 energy is still okay. You do have to kind of need this extra stasis slot for this card to be worth it, though. Unless you're really in a pinch for... unless you really need some kind of front-loaded damage in the early game, I would really only take this if I have the stasis support for it. And it's actually surprisingly difficult to fill more than 3 stasis slots if you can't do that already. Usually you're either naturally pushing yourself to 4 stasis slots with how much stasis cards you've taken, or you're filling 3 quite consistently, or less. So I think that this very much leans into a specific strategy of more stasis, of having a lot of stasis. And extra stasis slots are really powerful because you're getting a lot more passive value from your cards coming out at 0 cost. You're getting a lot more of those at once. It's actually the reason why the next card we're going to talk about was nerfed. But yeah, overall, this is very much the kind of card that you like. Do I need this? Yes, I take it. You can probably figure that out when you're in a run. There's not really any secrets that I know to this. Maybe there still exist some secrets. I don't know of any. Just take it when it's obvious. Actually, the one thing I will say is that even though this is a 1 card, gain as many stasis slots as you want kind of thing, the bigger your deck gets, the further away this is going to get from being that. So even if you have this in a large deck, you should probably consider taking a second of either this or Time Capacitor. The other gain a stasis slot, although this one is a power. This has a couple of advantages over the other one, over Stasis Strike, in that it's cheaper, and it's a power, which means it'll disappear. So if you have a limited amount of stasis, then taking this means that you can very much fill up those stasis slots and only ever need the 1. Also, the other advantage is that it upgrades to 0 cost. 0 cost power, usually not that great. Here, I think it's absolutely fine. Having a cheap way to gain an extra stasis slot means that it doesn't get in the way as much whenever you're setting up your combos and your powers. Or whenever you're setting up your overall power, not your card powers. Again, it's kind of the same reasoning as Stasis Strike, the only difference being that you know that you're not going to need more than... I guess that you know you're not going to need more than this if you're going to compare it to Stasis Strike. Overall, though, if you have too much stasis and you can fill up a 4th slot, then this is pretty good. I would probably take this more often than Stasis Strike because of how cheap it is. But having both options means that you'll find them more commonly in the pool. I have to wonder, though, is Time Capacitor just better than Stasis Strike? I haven't had too many situations where I can, like, continue to fill up a ton of stasis slots. I feel like I balance my stasis very well. So it's very easy to just not need extra stasis slots. So paying 2 costs and having an attack for it doesn't really appeal to me that much. There could be something I'm missing though, like the fact that my playstyle is very rigidly playing into filling stasis slots efficiently and exactly may actually be a weakness. I could actually maybe lean into the idea of a stasis strike a little bit more. Or if I find a stasis strike, find ways to fill it. You know, without leaning into too much setup in my deck. Okay, final card. Stasis Engine. Another zero-cost synergy, which means that it's not specifically for stasis, but it still helps. Stasis Engine. Whenever you play the 3rd zero-cost card in a single turn, gain energy and draw a card. I want to make a point here about something. This and Citrine, the rare gem, are the only 2 ways that Guardian has of actually gaining real energy. I guess except for Temporal Strike, but it just refunds itself. So you'd really have to play with it or put it into stasis for that to actually give you energy. Energy generation is very rare on this character because of stasis specifically, which should tell you that stasis is really important. Guardian does not have the luxury of fission or offering like the base characters do, or adrenaline, or anything like that. Guardian is very much reliant on stasis to do any kind of comboing like that, which is why Guardian doesn't have these. Which is why Guardian doesn't have cards like that or a playstyle like that, and it's why stasis is good because you have to wait. You have to use if you want extra cards, you have to use it. And you know, if you don't have the opportunity to play fast, you have to play slow anyways. So the wait is not a big deal. Anyway, this condition here, when you play the 3rd zero-cost card in a single turn, is somewhat difficult to do. Just raw. If you lean into it, then you can very reasonably get it to go off consistently every turn. Notice the wording, when you play the 3rd zero-cost card in a single turn. There's only procs 1 time per turn, which means you only get that energy and draw once. That being said, energy and draw is basically a boss relic in card form, as long as you can fulfill the condition. This matters with stasis specifically because when you have enough stasis, you can consistently get 1 card out of stasis to cost 0. So that covers 1 of your 3 cards per turn. Sometimes you can get more with stasis, with either accelerate or just filling up all 3 slots. Sometimes you get 2. But you do need to consider how you fill up this. Just like the other zero-cost thing, though, with floating orbs, gems also work. Especially the ones that generate shivs and wards count as 2. One thing I forgot to mention, though, is Sentry Blast / Sentry Wave. Those count as zero-cost cards, and you get those every single turn. So that's a great way to fuel both Stasis Engine and Floating Orbs. Both of those benefit a lot from having very consistent ways of playing zero-cost cards. I think overall Stasis Engine is a good card. I've heard some mixed opinions on this from other players. Some people don't like this card at all. I think a couple of them actually don't like this card because it was nerfed. It used to be every 3rd card in a single turn. So you could proc it as much as you want. Rhapsody, someone who used to play Downfall a lot more, abused that and made it infinite, and then it got nerfed because of that. The devs, if I'm not mistaken, from what I've heard, the devs specifically nerfed it because of their video, which is really funny. But yeah, I think this is another very powerful effect. Not much else to say about it. I think that 2 cost is a pretty hefty price. I think you can lean into it very reasonably, so long as you find the cards for it. It's very dependent on what cards you actually find. I think in one of my next 2 episodes, though, I take this early on. So tune in to see how that works out. I take it like floor 4 or floor 3 or something. Without any support for it yet, I speculate into it. Or maybe it was actually episode 60? I don't remember. Maybe you already saw it, maybe you'll see it in the future. Anyway, one way or another, you can look through the episodes and find it pretty fast if you just fast forward a little bit. What do I say about this? I guess just that I like the card. It's not always going to be viable, but when it is, it's still good value. I don't think you should sleep on it. I think if you have the means to proc this, you should take it, because I remember this has actually helped me quite a lot in boss fights. It's done a lot of good work for me. Guardian also doesn't have a lot of draw because of Stasis, essentially giving you more cards. And the draw that it does have is a little bit risky, like Overload, saying that you draw 2 less cards next turn. It's a pretty hefty penalty. Alright, that is all of the cards, which means the only thing left now, I'll show you these notes again, just for a sec. So if you want to pause and reread them in light of everything that we just said, you can. Actually, I guess we should talk about these relics before we go on to that one run. Yeah, pause the video right now if you want to see. Anyways, our first Stasis relic, Pilot's Codex. If you end your turn with no cards in Stasis, choose one of 3 cards to place into Stasis. You can skip if you want. This is really underpowered. I should probably leave some feedback on that. The fact that it has a condition that you can only place a card into Stasis if your Stasis slots are empty, like you're trying to fill your Stasis slots most of the time to get as much value from them as you can and get as many cards as you can from them. So the only time that this procs for me is whenever I get unlucky with my draws and can't put a card into Stasis. Also, the cards are completely random, which I don't think the average value of a Guardian card is that great. I think a lot of these cards are specific to situation. Choice of 3 random cards is generally not going to be great, especially because you're waiting a couple turns to actually get the value from them. So it's difficult to take advantage of this. I think this would be much better if you could just do this at the end of every turn. I think that would be much more in line with a card like this. I kind of get why they didn't do that, because Nilri's Codex, the Cursed Tome event book that you pay 21 health for, that one's really powerful because it puts cards in your draw pile. I think the fact that you have to wait, and the fact that Guardian's card pool is very situational, I think that you could get away with doing that. Anyways, it's not like you're going to have a choice with this most of the time, because most of the time you just get relics. I guess in a chest I would probably skip this. I would probably key this most of the time. There's not really any strategy to this. Just pick whatever's best for the situation. Keep in mind how many turns it's going to go into Stasis, whichever card you choose. And remember that you can skip. If you have a lot of Stasis stuff and you just didn't draw it, you don't want a dud card in your Stasis that's going to take up a slot that you want to fill with something else. Even without this relic, I've sometimes made that mistake of putting a card into Stasis with like Future Plans. I put a Defend in, and then I can't put a better card in the next turn because all my Stasis slots are filled. So just keep that in mind. Master Pilot David. I wonder what that's a reference to. Cryo Chamber. At the start of each combat, gain 1 Stasis slot. Very cool. I wonder it's a rare relic. Whenever a card enters Stasis, upgrade it. That last effect is not anything... There's no real secrets to that, I don't think, other than Orb Walk. Orb Walk, getting that into Stasis without having to upgrade it, that's a huge benefit. I guess also Shield Charger is good to put in. Stasis Field is also good to have this with. honestly, most cards are good to put into stasis and get an upgrade from. Although the later you get in the game, the less it's going to matter because you're going to have all your good cards upgraded already. But who knows? If you get this early, maybe you can build into that. The extra stasis slot is the real thing. Because having this at the start of combat means that you can build into this, just like you build into having 3 stasis slots already. Knowing that you're going to have 4 stasis slots at the beginning of combat means that you can build into that and get a lot of you can build into it and get a lot of value from it. That's also why it's a rare. I kind of alluded to this before, but Time Capacitor used to give you 2 stasis slots and then upgrade to 3 stasis slots, all for 1 cost. And in my series, I found out that if you just have 1 Time Capacitor and the ability to build into it, you can win the game with that many slots. So it got nerfed. This got nerfed to rare. That used to be uncommon. No, actually it used to be a shop relic, I think. Yeah, it used to be a shop relic. But now it's a rare relic because the power of stasis slots has been fully realized, or at least somewhat realized. Right, and then up next is our boss relic, Wanderbots. This got buffed because, again, of the power of stasis slots. They found out that losing 2 stasis slots was too much, very, very punishing. Now you only lose 1. I had a weird experience with Wanderbots in a recent episode. I know it was before 60. Probably in the lower 50s, actually. Where I kind of had this revelation where it felt like losing a stasis slot was kind of a toss-up how bad it was. Because I very strictly build into how many stasis slots I need. I don't kind of wander between having 2 and 3 or 3 and 4 that I'm using. I kind of very rigidly stick to 2 or 3 or 4 if I have the right thing for it. So losing a stasis slot is either still somewhat punishing that I don't want to do because I'm relying on stasis a lot, or if I'm not relying on stasis a lot, then it's very good relic. The one thing I will note though is that it does limit your future power. So I guess it's still okay as is. I don't think the dichotomy between the 2 types of decks is that bad. I don't think the fact that there's a hard cutoff that where something is good and something is bad is that bad, because it does limit your future power. But it is a bit weird. Anyway, losing 1 stasis slot means that you're getting less power out of your stasis, which kind of counteracts the fact that you're gaining an energy at the start of your turn, but not that much. Again, it depends on what deck you're building at the moment. If you have enough stasis to fill 3 stasis slots consistently, this is probably going to be pretty bad. You will consistently miss out on the value of your stasis cards, which are there for stasis, so they're probably not going to be doing a lot of other stuff for you. So then those cards become bad. But if you haven't found a lot of stasis stuff yet, then maybe this can be good. Guardian, I feel like I take energy a lot on Guardian. I don't know whether it's energy hungry or not, but I do take energy a lot. So, since this is an energy relic, I would be inclined to take it more often than not. That's pretty much all I have to say about it. I guess other than the fact that I like that it was buffed, it's no longer a super punishing relic. So if you were avoiding this before, maybe don't avoid it so much anymore. Alright, final relic, Bottled Black Hole. Guardian-specific relic. This is actually really close to Bottled Anomaly, which is also a Guardian unlock, but does something similar to Stasis without doing Stasis. Bottled Black Hole start each combat with a card of your choice in Stasis. I chose Shield Charger because you have to pick a card upon pickup. Shield Charger is also one that I really like because then you don't have to pay the energy cost to get it into Stasis, you just get the benefits. And especially for the first few turns of combat, that's really good. This has a lot of very unique possibilities. I think it works best with specific stasis things. I've used it on... I think I've considered using it on multi-beam. I haven't used it on laser turret yet, but that would be nice. I've used it on Sentry Blast. Using it on Sentry Blast means that it'll come out turn 2, and then you can start getting that benefit of every turn stasis sentry stuff from it. Also, I had a run where I had a bottled flame sentry blast and a bottled black hole sentry blast. So the bottled flame blast would get played and put a sentry wave into stasis, and then I have a staggered sentry blast sentry wave every turn. That was pretty cool. Bottling the same card twice is pretty cool. Bottling Orb Walk can be very good. I've considered bottling Multi-Beam before. I've considered bottling a zero-cost card before. Shield Charger, as I said, is also really good. You do have to remember, though, that any card you put in with Black Hole is actually going to come out the turn after you think it would. You would think that a zero-cost card, that goes into stasis for one turn, it would come out on turn 1. No, it gets put into stasis at turn 1. So a zero-cost card would come out on turn 2. So that's very important to remember if you're going to put a one-cost card into stasis. It's not going to come out until turn 3, which is actually a kind of long time to wait for a one-cost card. So if you're considering putting something like Future Plans or Time Capacitor in, actually Time Capacitor would be a good pick, because you don't need that for a few turns usually. But anyway, there's a lot of other one-costs. I guess Floating Orbs as well. If you're going to consider putting like a one-cost power in to get it as fast as possible, you're not going to get it for a few turns. I guess another relevant example is, I've actually done this before, having an Onyx in a one-cost card against the Heart. Having it in, or actually Resilient Plate might have been it, is some kind of debuff reduction. But regardless, getting that, putting it in a one-cost card and then getting it out on turn 3 means I still have to deal with the second turn of Vulnerable, Weak, and Frail. And then I only cleanse it on turn 3. So it still comes out a bit late. And you also have to kind of think about the size of your deck and whether or not that's actually worth it. You might be tempted to put a 2-cost card into stasis other than Shield Charger, but that won't come out until turn 4. And although you're getting free value from it, that's such a long time to wait that it's usually not worth it. So I think the key to using Bottled Black Hole is to look for very specific situations where it's good. Think about the kind of card that you're considering putting in there and see if that's worth it. But also very much pay attention to the cost of the card and remember what turn it's going to come out. 0-cost card comes out on turn 2, 1-cost card comes out on turn 3, 2-cost card comes out on turn 4. And if you put like a Fierce Bash in, it's going to come out on turn 5. I guess if you have Accelerate, that's actually fine for all of those cases. So if you have Accelerate, just pick a card you like, I guess. Maybe you can use the 1-cost powers, or maybe you can use the shield spikes. Yeah, anyway, a lot of possibilities with this. I think it's a very good shop relic. I almost always buy it when I see it. Okay. Well, that's it for all the cards and relics and the general stuff. So, I'm not going to bandit run in case this recording gets screwed up. Let's go to my other save file real quick. Come on. Load. Okay. So, I did mention earlier that I was going to show you a run that I had where I very much went into stasis. Maybe I didn't mention that. This is a recreation of it. This is not exactly what happened. I was going down the Spire. I don't remember. I think I was facing Silent at the end of the act. Silent 1, the Poison Silent. But anyway, these were my relics before fighting the boss. Dekka's washers were different back then. It would draw 3 cards turn 1 and put a Daze in your draw pile. Now it just draws 1 card for the first 3 turns. But back then, it was basically a super bag of prep with a Dazed downside. They changed it because there were too many turn 1 card and draw effects, so you were overdrawing a lot. I also had Helix, I had Sharpened Fragment, Warpaint, Strike Dummy, and Prayer Wheel. And this was my deck, exactly. Sunder's Bane, 3 strikes, 4 defends. This was back when Aquamarine was a common, so I had the very common Dex and Ward Twin Slam, the Dash Twin Slam. I had a Suspension plus, a Pre-Program plus with a socketed Quartz. I had a Time Bomb, which was also different. I'll come back to that in a second. Event Steam, a Stasis Engine, a Repulsor, a Speed Boost, and another Aquamarine. Again, common. Time Bomb, similar to... What was I going to say? Some other... Was I going to say Deca's Washers? I don't remember. Anyway, Time Bomb used to be another 2-cost card, but it wasn't an attack, it was a skill. It would put itself into stasis. It was another card that put itself into stasis. And then it was volatile, and when it exited stasis, it would do 22 damage to all enemies, upgraded to 30. It was a long wait for AoE. It was one of the worst AoE cards. I'm glad that this is front load now. But that meant that I had a 0 attack Act 1. Now, granted, this is like the extreme case that I'm showing off. So I had a couple relics that leaned into this a lot. Sharpened Fragment gives you a Crystal Shiv at the start of your turn, which is a normal Shiv. It's 4 damage. It's an Infinite Blades that you play at turn 0. So you get 1 turn 1 and every turn after. And then we also had Strike Dummy for strike damage. So we had a bit of extra damage, but the rest of our deck had no attacks in it. We had Time Bomb, which could only be used once. We had Vent Steam for some vulnerable, but the rest of the deck was completely reliant on making use of Stasis. And not only did we survive the act, we killed the act boss, we killed Silent with this, but we also killed multiple elites with this. I think it was Lagavulin and Gremlin Knob that we managed to do. I don't remember if we fought sentries or not. I'll look in just a minute on screen here. And of course, this was during a time where broken keys also worked in normal fights and elite fights. They would give you strength decks and stuff. So I think I got some benefit out of that too. And that's also why I took Repulsor. Taking an early Repulsor in Downfall mode was a very big thing for me. Something I've had to stop doing in normal mode. Because I could afford... But I took this because I could afford it, and Niao puts a lot of curses in your deck in Act 4, both fights. But anyway, yeah. Because I was able to constantly cycle things into stasis and get the cards out for free, I was able to do enough damage to elites without having to take any attacks. And that's still, and even though I had Strike Dummy and a Shiv every turn, that's still a big deal, because attack density is still a very big part of killing elites normally. So I was able to achieve this without taking any attacks. That means that Stasis is just as good at tackling Act 1 as attacks are. Despite the fact that Guardian has seemingly a lot of dud cards and not as much front-loaded damage as most characters, you have defensive mode on your side, which gives you an extra turn against most fights, especially elite fights, that's good. But you also have an entirely new set of cards which can function as that front-loaded damage, which can function in lieu of front-loaded damage. You don't need to take strictly damage cards to win an act. And the fact that that's available to you means that you will be much more likely to survive Act 1 than if you just had Guardian's attack pool available. You can take Stasis and win acts based off of that. Again, this is before the Act 1 boss, so we don't have a rare from the boss yet. These were both from, I don't know, normal fights, transforms, match and keep event? I don't remember. Anyway, I just wanted to show you that real quick. Fossilized Helix also helped a lot, of course. Oh yeah, this is also when I boss swapped because the starter relic was not something I liked. So I also had an extra energy. Yeah, so like, again, a few things that helps with not having attacks, but like, I can't emphasize this enough. those things do not make up for not having attacks. Stasis made up for not having those attacks. Let's go look at the run history for this run, actually. Just to see exactly what was happening there. We are going to have to switch save files again, since the history is in this one. The official 100 Guardian 100 game analysis save file. November 16th, I believe. I looked this up before I made that recreation. 16. Suspension, pre-program, quartz, aquamarine. Yeah, this is correct. I got sharpened fragment from there. Oh yeah, you have to sacrifice max HP for that. Oh, we fought 3 elites. Lagavulin, 1 damage. Okay. Generally, Lagavulin is very easy for Guardian because of defensive mode, but still, taking 1 damage is very impressive. That was even before Sharpened Fragment. I only had Deca's Washers. We had Suspension, Pre-Program, Quartz, and Aquamarine before taking this. And Deca's Washers. And we killed Lagavulin just on Stasis. And I guess potions, probably. Potions, we probably used potions. Actually, we can see what potions we got. Dexterity potion? Okay. Well, that's not a great potion for taking elites, but you know what? It worked. We took on Lagavulin and only took 1 damage that entire fight. It took 6 turns, wow. How did we do that? Surely suspension pre-program is not that good. Is it? Maybe just the amount of stasis we had was good enough. And also the fact that we had 4 energy, I guess. We also upgraded suspension. I don't think I put the quartz in it for some reason. I was gonna put I put the quartz in the pre-program, that's why. That way both cards drew a card. I guess I also had the Dex gem for Twin Slam, so I had Dex Ward Twin Slam. That probably helps a lot. And then I focused on doing damage because Lagavulin were in defensive. Okay. That kind of makes sense now. But still, that's still a very good testament to how powerful Stasis is. Because we didn't even have Sharpened Fragment by then, or a potion. We didn't have either of those things. At least in theory. I don't remember what I took as the Neo. No, I do remember. It was the boss swap. Anyway, we got Sharpened Fragment, then we took on Sentries. Oh, we did take on Sentries, and we took 0 damage? How is that possible? We got another Dexterity potion from this fight. Wow, okay. I mean, Twin Slam completely blocks a single Sentry attack. Doesn't take much more to block 2 if you have that plus a defend. Having Stasis, I guess, also really helps against Sentries, because whenever you shuffle with the Dazes, then you don't have to worry about not having cards, because you're always going to have something. Man, I gotta go back and rewatch that episode, I guess. I need to pay close attention to how I beat these elites. If you're curious about how this happened too, then go watch it too. It's episode 23, I think. Repulsor here. Again, merchants in downfall mode. Oh yeah, I purchased a time bomb here. Time bomb, that helps a lot. Okay, so I did have some damage, just not an attack. Yeah, merchants are fights too, so you get a card reward from them. Got a repulsor here. I recalled here to break the kit at the start of the next act, because I didn't really have a good upgrade, I guess. I got Strike Dummy here. This was another Lagavulin. Okay, so I didn't fight Knob. I guess that makes sense. Knob, I feel like I would have taken more of my HP. This was a 0 damage fight too. We took 1 damage to 3 elites with nothing but stasis. That's crazy. We didn't even have good potions. We just got a bunch of Dex potions. We got Speed Boost from this one, and Strike Dummy. I'm sure that helped a lot. We got Prayer Wheel here. It doesn't show us what the other one is, but I know I took an Aquamarine from this because I went and reviewed the episode before making this. Anyway. I skipped Ancient Power because of our attack and block density was so low, it was just a bunch of stasis. We didn't need Recover because we already had enough. Yeah, and then we just took on the boss, and we also took 0 damage there. Probably because we were able to... It says it's triple... No, wait, that's the wrong thing. Yeah, this was... I'm pretty sure this was silent. We took 0 damage, probably because we juggled our defense enough and also the antidote to clear all the poison. And we got an Onyx from that, which is cool. And then by the end of the game, we ended up with a double stasis engine. We had multi-beam. We had double speed boost for combos as well, it looks like. Actually, where is all of our damage? Twin slam. We got rid of all of our strikes. Crazy. Vent steam. Okay, we got a roll attack. Pulsar quartz program. We had a multi-beam, of course. We took a guardian world, which actually paid off. Is that exhaust? No. Compile package. Okay. So our damage was roll attack, time bomb, multi-beam, compile package, prepare crush, and discovery. And what about our relics? I don't remember what I bought. Probably compile package. This used to give the shivs and wards on turn 3. Oh, prickly shields. I don't think that's all of our damage, but it probably did a decent amount. Yeah, it looks like this whole run was just a lot of stasis. We obviously found some more damage by the end of it, but multi-beam also works very well for that. How did we do against Niao here? 37 damage in 11 turns. That makes sense. What about here? The Elite, we took 0 damage too. That's crazy. A lot of Swift Potion there. Alright. Yeah, we took the Empty Cage here. That makes a lot of sense. Stasis with less dead cards makes it even better. Wonder what we removed there. Was it actually 2 strikes with Strike Dummy? That'd be crazy. Maybe it was a strike and defend. No, we still have all our defense. I guess it was 2 strikes then. I'm crazy. Anyway, that's going to be it for this How to Play Guardian video. I hope this has been helpful to you. I hope it will help you in your attempts to play Guardian. I've heard that people have been climbing Ascension thanks to my advice. That's really nice to hear. I'm glad that I'm improving your experience and allowing and facilitating enjoyment of this character that I also enjoy. Recently I decided that this was not going to be the last episode. I have some other miscellaneous stuff that I'd like to cover about Guardian that has not been covered in the main mechanics. I'm really going to have to work on that one, but stay tuned. We'll be having a 4th and final episode after 10 more episodes of the 100 game series. So yeah, that's it. Thanks for watching.